Hello and happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Merry whatever you celebrate or don't celebrate. I hope you're having a good time. Today we're looking at two very short fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen, and if you haven't read them yet, then there's a link in the description. It's an English version and they take so few minutes to read, and they're free to read, so I feel like go do it. Or you can just listen to me talk about them if that's what you're more interested in. No harm in that. So it's The Fir Tree and The Little Match Girl. All in all, Hans Christian Andersen is most famously known, of course, for The Little Mermaid around the world, but he made so many interesting fairy tales that, or at least the Disneyfied version of The Little Mermaid, and he made so many more interesting fairy tales, and I do like The Little Mermaid, but it's by far not my favorite of his fairy tales. So today we're going to be talking about my favorite two of his fairy tales, so I'm excited about that. And they're festive, I mean they're Christmassy, but they're quite sad as well. First off, I feel like we should talk about The Little Match Girl, and of course I understand that these are their fairy tales, so it's typically a young audience that read them, but I also feel like they have, at least their Hans Christian Andersen and a lot of other fairy tale writers are known for putting so many beautiful topics and meanings and understandings into his work that it's really something that everyone can enjoy. And The Little Match Girl it's a hard fairy tale for children to read. Nevertheless, I feel like it's an important fairy tale for them to read, and it's about a little girl who didn't sell her matches. She's cold and her home is not very nice, and I mean, I'm gonna spoil it, but it's a 200-year-old fairy tale, so I feel like we'll be okay on that one. She's cold and she's lost a shoe, and she's poor, and she lights one match to warm her up, and she sees all the most beautiful things when in the fire by that little match, so she keeps lighting them, and she sees such beautiful imagery that's Christmassy and warm and welcoming. And in the end, her grandmother, in the last match, as far as I recall, comes to her. Her grandmother recently died, and she was the only person who was nice to the little girl. She shows up and she takes her with her. In the morning, passersby see the little girl who is frozen dead on the sidewalk, but as Hans Christian Andersen writes, they will never know what beauty she saw that night. And I get all teary now because I feel like it's such a harsh fairy tale, but I feel like it's important in the sense that Hans Christian Andersen did a wonderful job in terms of giving children a voice in literature. There's also one about, I think it's a little boy that's dying, that's asking his mom, why am I so cold, why are you crying, so on and so forth. So I mean, it's harsh topics, but for once there's a writer back then that gave the children a voice, and a dignified voice, and thereby also made it accessible for other children to learn about the hardships of the world, learn about other people, understand life and death and the meaning of it. And those are very big topics, and I feel like if there's a place to be able to grasp and talk about those big topics, it's in fairy tales. It's just such a beautiful fairy tale. I'm sorry, it's beautifully written. I mean, I think you could all agree, if you have read it, that when you read it, it's like you're there with the little girl. You can just exactly imagine how everything would look and how she felt. I mean, we should probably move on to the next one, because I'm just gonna work myself up talking about this, and it's hard talking about because I think it's such a beautiful fairy tale that it's what you have to say about it. But I think it's one of his most beautifully written fairy tales. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I read it every Christmas. I will read it again. The next fairy tale we're going to be talking about is The Fir Tree, and it's a fairy tale about a little fir tree out in the woods, seeing how all the other fir trees are big and grand, and they get taken with the lovely humans home. And this fir tree, all it thinks about is that it wants to be big like the others, and it wants to go to the homes of the humans, and that's all it thinks about. And finally it gets chopped down and taken there, and the day after Christmas it gets put in the attic, and it gets placed down in the courtyard and gets jumped on and laughed at by how ugly it is because it's all dried up by the children, and finally gets chopped up and dies. It takes a certain set of skill to write as an inanimate, of course trees are alive, but to give it such an emotional range, and for us to fully understand the emotional range that this tree has, I think it takes extraordinary talent. This really has a special place in my heart. My grandfather has a cassette with the fairy tale, someone reads it aloud, and he would play it to me when I was little, and I would sit and cry because I felt so bad for the fir tree, and he would think that it was because I thought it was so good, and then, which I did, but I got so sad, and then he'd play it again and I'd cry even more. It's always been a part of my Christmas tradition, just like the little match girl, and I think an important topic in that fairy tale is that in the end it says something like, if only I'd enjoyed it while I had it. It had a lovely life in the forest and it never appreciated it. And I feel like that's something that it's a universal truth, that we have a habit of, especially in these days, to always look forward to the next thing, and society have gotten so busy, and just slowing down and appreciating what you have instead of having to become better and bigger and more popular. Today of all times, it's perhaps a very important lesson to learn, and it's a better way to learn it through a fairy tale than through your own life. But yeah, it's sort of a reminder of being grateful for what you have and seeing the beauty in here and now instead of worrying about tomorrow, and yeah, making the best of it. And that's how I interpret it anyway, and I feel like I feel so bad for the fir tree. Hans Christian Andersen was incredibly gifted at making us capable of seeing what he's writing, but I feel like the Little Match Girl is definitely the best one in that regard. Nevertheless, I feel like the fir tree has a very special place in my heart, and even though it's not the Little Match Girl in the terms of imagery, I still feel that it is incredibly well written, and when you read it, you can definitely see the tree in your head, you can see all the situations it's put in. And even though Hans Christian Andersen was a very interesting human being who wrote down his diary when he was at the toilet, he was afraid of being buried alive, he'd bring ropes with him. I believe that he was closeted gay as well as I gathered. For that period of time, he was a very interesting person, to say the least. I think that translates into his work in the sense that it's unlike any other sort of fairy tales I've ever read, so if you should want to read them, then I'd recommend these. I feel like they were both excellent. Of course, I've read them before. I chose them specifically because I find them extremely Christmassy, even though there's death in both of the stories. I find them extremely beautiful. Every time I read them, they give me something to think about. Little Match Girl, it's being kind to others. And side note I want to talk about in The Little Match Girl is how he contrasts to Dickens, because in The Little Match Girl, it's interesting that the topic is that God, or her dead grandmother, who's now an angel, saves the child and gives her a good ending to her story, whereas in A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, the general theme is that it's up to humans to make a difference. So I think that's interesting. I think it might also be because Hans Christian Andersen came from a poor Danish family, which was a more rural country from what I know back in those days, whereas Charles Dickens lived in London, which was a lot more progressive. So I think that might also be why it's a spiritual rather than logical morale in them. Anyway, I'm just mumbling about. I think you could definitely look more into it. I'm actually, these are so dear in my heart that I am incredibly excited to hear if you guys have anything to say about them, your thoughts and your opinion about them. Of course, I'll be okay if you don't like them, but I think they're so beautiful, and yeah, I mean, I'm gonna recommend you read them again if you haven't. So I'm probably gonna read them again before Christmas, which means I'm a little bit busy, but I don't know. For next time, if we should talk about that, then I imagine we're going to be reading The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And also I imagine we are going to be reading Only Dull People Are Interesting at Breakfast, I believe it's called. I'll write down here. It's Oscar Wilde. So yeah, I'm excited about that. I will see you next time, hopefully. Really hope you enjoyed it. It was a bit of a Christmassy episode, which I know not everyone is into, but I think it's quite cozy. Whether you like Christmas or not, those are interesting fairy tales, at least to me. So let me know also if you want to look more into Hans Christian Andersen, because he has written a lot of things. And I'm generally a big fan. So yeah, until next time, Merry Christmas.